You've used the internet, many of you, to fight virtual wars. How many of you have used it to end real wars? But in the last few years, that started to change. You in this class have used the web to press for access to knowledge, for access to essential medicines, to call for urgent action in Darfur, to elect a new president. Last fall, you used Facebook, YouTube, text messaging, Twitter to bring people to the polls, to make them better citizens, and to change the country. You live in a global century. In the years ahead, please use the tools you've mastered to become better global citizens. One of those tools happens to be my life's passion, international law. You can't be a global citizen without understanding foreign and international law. Because for you, the defining image of your era is not a world divided by the Berlin Wall. It's a world interconnected by the World Wide Web. And that web and the social networks that run through it geometrically multiply the links between domestic and international law. These last few weeks, I've been reminded how rarely we talk publicly about why international law matters. Too many of us have given the question no thought, or give too much weight to three myths about international law. The first myth is somehow international law is not really law, so Americans have no reason to follow it. But respecting international law was one of the founding credos of our country. In the framing act of our birth, the authors of the Declaration of Independence paid decent respect to the opinions of mankind. Yet Americans who had never dreamed of disobeying the law at home still argue that obeying international law should be done only when convenient and in America's interest. But in most cases, following international law is in America's interest. Like individuals who obey domestic law, nations who obey international law find it's both the right and the smart thing to do. No law is a straitjacket, but as we've learned since September 11th, if we don't obey international law, we squander our moral authority, we shrink our capacity to lead. When we break international law, we weaken its power to protect our own citizens. How, I ask you, can the Geneva Conventions protect our own soldiers abroad if we violate them home? And how, I ask you, can we protest other countries torturing our own citizens if our own public officials, past and present, condone or publicly defend the use of torture? Does torture make us safer, or does it simply inflame those who already wish us ill? Does torture work? The evidence strongly suggests otherwise. But what we should be asking is, whatever made that the question? What would we say to North Korea, for example, if it defended its torture on the grounds that it made the country safer by producing valuable intelligence? This law school taught you we adopt per se rules precisely to reject such instrumental arguments that use people as means, not ends. As Senator John McCain has argued, the international law rules against torture and abuse of prisoners were never about them and who they are. They're about us and who we are, and how we're obliged to treat all prisoners regardless how they behave. Ours is a country built on human rights and the rule of law. But a right is not a human right if it only applies to some humans. The rule of law is not law if it only applies when convenient. We should not celebrate acts that stain our national identity by lessening who we are. Now there's a second myth. Some believe foreign policy should be left to the president alone, operating in secret. But as we learned during Vietnam, Watergate, Iran-Contra, checks and balances don't stop at the water's edge. Our constitutional system was designed and works better when the president and his subordinates must answer to people who don't work for them, especially in Congress and in the courts. And a third and final myth: the U.S. cannot take part in international system without surrendering our sovereignty. But today, protecting sovereignty means engaging the world, not retreating into our shell. If you read the paper, you know every day globalization is inevitable, it's accelerating, it must be managed. Each of our recent challenges, financial meltdown, energy crisis, climate change, swine flu, nuclear proliferation, piracy, yes, terrorism is not local, it is global. We live in an interdependent world. In tackling our challenges, international law is not the problem, it's a solution. And if we don't work on building a framework of international law, too often we'll have no good solution. Law is sometimes called the wise restraints that make us free. To those who say international law constricts us, I say international law frees us. We are free to travel abroad, to take money out of foreign ATM machines, to speak with, buy, and sell, and borrow from foreigners, because international law gives us the orderly frameworks to do so. That is what it frees us to do. And as we've learned in the last year, whether in matters of national security or finance, a world where the powerful can bend the law to suit their convenience ultimately fosters neither safety nor stability. My old teacher, Abe Chase, called the job of a legal advisor the task of holding the country to its own best standards and principles. The years since 9/11 have been tiring, but in the grand scheme of things, the last 8 years will loom less large than the next 8. The next 8 will determine whether the pendulum of policy swings back from where it's been pushed. And it's because I want to help our country face these challenges that I've chosen to leave a home, a school, and a job I love. My fellow graduates, I ask you to do the same. You will soon have your degree, but your education was always a means, not the end. The goal of education, Chaplain William Sloane Coffin once wrote, is not to drive a wedge between thought and action. It's to enable action of a higher kind. Please ask what you can do for your country, because frankly, it has never needed you more. So let me leave you with 3 lessons this place has taught me. First, live your values. They make you who you are. In the years ahead, you'll have many clients, but your clients are not just those who pay you. Your constant client will be the integrity of the law itself. A good lawyer is not just a counselor, but a conscience. A counselor tells her client what the law says, but a conscience warns her client not to follow an option which is awful, even if it may be lawful. So in the years ahead, try not to say no whenever the law and your conscience say yes. But whatever you do, never, ever tell your client yes when the law and your conscience say no. A second lesson, fly into the flame. Take the risk, try new things. Ships are safe in harbor, they say, but harbor are not what ships are for. Others will always urge you to play it safe. You must urge yourself to take chances. While you've been here, I've told you many things. I advised you how to live your life as a lawyer. I ask you to stand for something, to live lives not of selfishness, but of service. I ask you to preserve our values, to help promote a process of humane globalization. Let me tell you a secret. You thought I was exhorting you. I was really urging myself to put my money where my mouth is, to commit to a new and riskier course, as frightening as it may be. The unspoken truth is that everyone is afraid, but there's nothing wrong with being afraid. The greatest satisfactions and accomplishments in life often come when you move forward in the face of those